Now let's move on to the subject of routing groups. Let me start off by drawing you a little diagram here to remind you about what a routing group does for us. If I've got two Exchange servers, well, let's start over. Let's say that I bring up my first Exchange server. So there's the first one I bring up. Everything's cooking. I've got Exchange information. Everything's going. When I create a second Exchange server, I now have an option. I can put it in what's called the default first routing group. What that's assuming is that the network connection between these two servers is fast and reliable. What does fast mean? Generally, fast means around 512K. It can mean different things depending on network utilization and so forth, but generally 512K is where it starts. Now, because what's going to happen is these machines are going to replicate information back and forth to each other without worrying about the network, without concerning us. It's going to happen automatically. But what happens when I have another server in another part of the country, say, and the network connection between them is not as fast and reliable? What I can do is put that server in a different routing group, and a routing group tells it, look, the connection between here and here is not exactly fast and reliable. So what I want to do is I want to manually set up a connector between these two routing groups, and then I will tell you under what conditions and what time to pass mail back and forth between these routing groups. And what this does is this restricts replication, is what this is for. We're going to build a fence around these servers that says automatic replication takes place inside this fence. And it doesn't go any further until I set up a routing group connector to do it. Now, let's go take a look in System Manager at how to create a routing group. So here we are in System Manager. Now, you'll notice I don't see any routing groups. What's going on? Well, remember, if we right-click on our organization, go down to Properties, we can tell it to display routing groups. So we say, OK. On our routing groups, notice under our first administrative group, we see routing groups. And there is our first routing group. And that's the default. It was there all the time. Notice the members of this routing group is the server that I'm on. Here it is. Notice for the routing group, there's a connectors container. We only have one routing group, so we don't have any connectors. There's nothing to connect it to. Now keep in mind, this is the best way to do Exchange. This is the simplest way to do Exchange. Now, I would remind you the best way to buy your house is just to pay cash for it, right? There's only one problem, one minor reason that we all don't do that, because it just don't work that way. So, while I can tell you that keeping a single routing group in an Exchange organization is easier, unfortunately, real life doesn't dictate that. What happens when I know I'm going to set up a server that's not connected reliably to this server? Notice I can go to Routing Groups, right-click, and say New Routing Group, and I will call this Western. This is the Western part of our organization. So we'll apply that. Say OK. Notice here's our new Western routing group. When I install my next server into this Exchange organization, it will detect that there's more than one routing group, and it'll ask me, where do you want to put this server? Okay, and so I can put it there. Now, this is real interesting. Notice that in this administrative group, Leesburg is here. But I can't move it to another administrative group. It's there. The only way I can move it is to uninstall it and reinstall in a different administrative group. That's why we forest prep and load Exchange System Manager first, create all these administrative groups, and then on subsequent Exchange installs it asks us, oh, by the way, which administrative group do you want to stick that server in? So I do want to show you something here about routing groups. Notice Leesburg right now is in this first routing group, and I want it to be in the Western routing group. Here's how I move it. Watch how complicated. I grab Leesburg, drag it to Western, and let it go. Now notice it's in Western. It's no longer in the first routing group. I decide I want to put it back. I drag it, and I drop it. These routing groups help us match the logical layout of Exchange to our underlying physical network. We just have to know where our reliable connections are, pair our servers up based on routing groups. We can have as many routing groups out here as we'd like. Notice I can put another one out here, Northern, and we have Northern routing group. Notice we have connectors and members there. Now in the next video, we'll talk about connectors and setting connectors up.